Hello, very beautiful community. A light-hearted but also serious, episode today about clickbait in the information environment, about the demise of the tyrant in the Kremlin. Dmitry Gordon's two YouTube channels. Dmitry Gordon is a huge publicist, media owner, media personality, one-on-one interview. I'll say a bit more about that in a moment, in Ukraine. And his YouTube channels, he's got two giant YouTube channels. According to Olga Tishuk, who is a digital agency person in Ukraine, has just done a piece on this. According to her analysis, Gordon's YouTube channels ran the story that Putin has dropped dead in their thumbs and in their titles in the last year 165 times. It's actually only 148 times if you take away the stories about Putin actually surviving alleged assassination attempts. So before we look at that, and you are familiar with that, you see a lot of clickbait, you watch a lot of clickbait, some of you, so you understand how much the algorithm rewards this in our information environment. But obviously Gordon's channels are completely out of control and are a real extreme. So we'll analyze it. But first, let's say a couple of words about Dmitry Gordon. There he is. This is him selling his pillow. So he has not got a personality disorder. He's not got a narcissistic personality disorder. But he is a bit of an egomaniac of a self-ironical variety. Him selling coffee, him selling marshmallow. He's famous for selling marshmallow. And he loves saying his name. So he loves constructing sentences with his name in them. So for our Ukrainian and Russian viewers, he could say something like this. And this is in Russian because Gordon speaks Ukrainian, but he speaks Russian most of the time, which is why I'm also saying his name in Russian. He could say something like this. Я, Дмитрий Гордон, на канале Дмитрий Гордон и в гостях у Дмитрия Гордона хочу сделать сенсационное заявление про зефир Дмитрий Гордон, без шоколада, в магазине Гордон. So he literally can insert his name repeatedly into sentences. And for all of that, he is actually an amazing one-on-one interviewer with flaws. The flaws are, you are so amazing, how can I be as amazing as you? The strength is that he has a genuinely erotic way of paying attention to his guest. It's a complete bodily experience with sensitivity to minutiae, the way he attends to his guest relaying their sentiments of their experience, which is why people tell him stuff and tell him stuff in particularly open ways that they don't with anybody else. So he's the guy who is going to interview, let's say, Mr. Khodorkovsky and get Mr. Khodorkovsky to say something he's never said before about his prison experience. His catalog of interviews dates back 3 decades and more, covers a lot of the significant political and cultural but also trashy pop figures on the ex-Soviet space. And it's something he genuinely does well. Now back to the article. Amazing statistics here, so we're going to look at them. 24 times his channels in the thumb or in the title imply that Putin had a stroke or a heart attack. 22 times Putin just dropped dead. 17 times he got cremated or buried. 17 times he survived an assassination attempt. 11 times he fell into a coma. 8 times he was poisoned. and 3 times the story was oncological. What do we make of this? Because this is quite an amazing excess of clickbait. Well, before we analyze it, let's just literally say a word about the tyrant and the Kremlin's prospects. We simply don't know his health status. There is absolutely no reliable information about what his health issues are, and if he has any significant ones at all. What we do know from one investigation is that there's reason to believe that quite some years back he was accompanied by a couple of thyroid specializing oncologists. Again, there's plenty of ways of having a fairly benign thyroid cancer. So apart from that, we really don't know much. He's got reasonable genetics, and he is obsessed with immortality. That's one of the differences between Trump and Putin. Trump wants to cling to life and paint as much of the world in fake Trump gold as possible. And that's his legacy before he goes. Putin doesn't want to create anything before he goes because he doesn't want to go. He's genuinely obsessed with going on for as long as possible without thinking about the end, right? And that can happen to people. There's a story that the wonderful art historian John Richardson, who was friends with Picasso, says about Picasso, who had an extreme phobia of death. And one of Picasso's birds dropped dead over lunch, and Picasso's partner at the time had the bird replaced immediately with an identical looking one. And after the lunch, Picasso picked up the bird that was now a new bird, but he had no idea, and showed it to John. And he said, "Look, John, my birds, you see my birds? They're immortal." So Putin is not thinking about it the way Trump is. Putin genuinely is caught up in fantasies of immortality. There's one thing I do want to say about this, and that's that you can't underestimate sincerity when people get corrupted by power. They believe the crazy shit they say they think a great deal of the time. And so Putin is not a guy who thinks he is usurping power. He is more legitimate than anybody on earth, right? His destiny is tied in a Wagnerian sense with the destiny of the Russian, not even of the Russian people, of Russian culture. For Putin, Russian culture is something that's separate from Russian people. Russian people are just sort of shit fillers in of Russian culture. And if you could actually fire them and replace them with better versions of them, that'd be good. So he is quite demophobic in that sense. He really doesn't like the people of his country. He thinks that they just fill in the space, but it would be better if they were different. But all of that means that Putin has an unbelievable sense of purpose. He really has, from his own vantage point, something to live for. He's not a guy who is sort of mismanaging the collapse of an empire. He is a guy on an extraordinary mission that sort of transcends history. And so he has an unbelievable sense of purpose. Unfortunately, he has as deep a sense of purpose as an incredible painter or musician who works on a high level and is completely in love with what they do and just finds it magically meaningful. Unfortunately, Putin finds his shit magically meaningful, whatever he does there, sitting around in the Kremlin or in his various bunkers and residences. So unfortunately for us, the tyrant has an unbelievable sense of purpose because he's so delusional. He's basically like an alien. With that level of corruption by power, that level of detachment, that lack of friction with real world contexts, that degree of unchecked and informal power, basically humans, unless they are superhuman, go nutty under these conditions. And so he genuinely sits around there finding things obviously true, which are ludicrous. Right? And so he has this deep sense of purpose. All right, let's do the algorithmic analysis. I'm not going to show you the thumbs, but you basically get what they are, and a lot of them have been sort of AI inflected recently. So Putin is sort of crying, and the thumb text would be Putin's dropped dead again, which is roughly every 2 days on Dmitry Gordon's channels. The digital agency woman says that's actually hurting his numbers. I disagree. I think the reason they're running this slop is because his team just know that he's going to get 100,000 views with the slop and 70,000 views without. Now you might say, yeah, you'll get more views, but eventually you're going to have to pay for it. And unfortunately, in our information environment, I don't have faith in that. There's all kinds of people who are dodgy. And it seems like they exhaust themselves, exhaust their topic, but actually they can just regroup, pick another topic, an adjacent topic, or an adjacent way of talking about the same topic. Off they go again. And so it's very difficult to actually discredit yourself in our information environment, except with, if we're very, very blunt about this, let's divide people into epistemic losers and epistemic winners. You will lose immediately with epistemic winners if you do that, but that's a tiny percentage, right? The majority of humans will behave like epistemic losers online, and so you can tell them that the moon's fallen out of the sky 150 times per year, and they'll be back 2 years later, 3 years later to still listen to you. And new people will come and will not be put off by the fact that you've said the moon's fallen out of the sky 150 times and it still hasn't. So let's say something quick about this. Politically, psychologically, and then perhaps most interestingly, algorithmically. So politically, you get the point. Politically, it can be a bit of light entertainment to talk about the tyrant in the Kremlin dropping dead. But pushed too far, it has the risk of depoliticizing you, because you are beginning, right, to put some faith into things happening which you simply cannot control, possibly at the expense of engaging with the world in a way that aspires to increase your control in the world, right? When you are at war, you've always got two risks. The first risk is that you become negative. You define yourself in virtue of what you're not. What are you? I'm the opposite of the baddies attacking me. And the other risk is that you over-idealize yourself. You over-idealize your past, your identity, and so on, in a way that can be sustained at a moment of peak mobilization, but as political mobilization declines, all the holes appear in your story about yourself, and as mobilizing as you thought it was, its medium-term unsustainability actually becomes counterproductive. But that's not to say you can't have fun with this either, right? You're a victim of aggression, and so it's okay to make jokes. The trouble is that this is not a private citizen making jokes. This is essentially a media company that has also a couple of YouTube channels feeding something into the information environment that is on balance unconstructive. Now, the psychological analysis is roughly that we tend to struggle to bear thoughts about the world as it is, especially bits of the world we can't control. And so we replace these objects in the world that we can't control with fantasy versions of them which we can't control. Right? We can't knock off the real tyrant off his pedestal, but let's knock off a fantasy one 148 times over and over and over and over. And of course, that is one of the central features of human political experience. The inability to bear reality is a very, very, very basic part of how we relate to politics, actually across cultures. But I think the most interesting analysis is the algorithmic one. And of course, what's going on there is co-creation. How does it work? I don't know. I'm Ricky. I'm going to start a couple of YouTube channels, and I don't know if I like tomatoes or apples more. It turns out that the algorithm happens to have connected me with tomato people first. So I'm going to go all in on tomatoes. What do my people think? The ones I've now been connected with, they just think tomatoes are great. So I'm going to say that tomatoes are super duper great. And they're going to watch more. And then I'm going to say that tomatoes are so great that it's basically no other fruit and vegetables except tomatoes. And then I'm going to say tomatoes are so great that there's actually literally nothing in the world except tomatoes. The whole world is just tomato. There is nothing else. There is only tomato. We are the tomato channel in a tomato world. So I've gone from not really liking something or having a preference for something to discovering that the audience I've been matched with likes it. I've then gone on about how great it is, which has then caused them to like it even more than they liked it before, and has now caused me to believe what I'm saying, even though to begin with I didn't. Why do I now believe it? I now believe it because I've been saying it so long, and it's nearly impossible for human beings to believe that something they say for a long time, even though they started saying it instrumentally, isn't true, right? Because then you'd have to admit something very painful, that you're being manipulative, and humans don't like doing that. So it's a little bit of co-creation, right? Because I couldn't have been matched with the tomato audience and succeeded by talking about apples, right? And so it's the same with Dmitry Gordon's channels. People love to click on something bad's happened to Putin, and his rappers and titles have dramatized that. And a sort of a materialist Marxist account here would say that beneath this dance of, mutually perpetuating co-option, there is a profit motive, right? There's a big company that's found that the most effective way for it to make more money and gain more economic power and power generally is through enticing people into these joint self-perpetuating dances and loops of co-option. And that point is not entirely false. This materialist point is not entirely false. Now, what's reasonable, of course, is that there is a culture on YouTube of sometimes saying cheeky or provocative things, right? And that it's okay to be playful and it's okay to be dramatic, but there are certain boundaries, right? And it's hard to know where to draw the line, because somebody could come along and say, what if I find a way of doing really, really, really great content, but wrapping it up in complete and utter trash? Let's say somebody starts a channel educating people about the implications of the climate crisis, but basically puts up completely apocalyptic titles and thumbnails about the end of the world. Now, I personally think it won't work, because the kind of people that click on that are not going to be the kind of people who want to stay. So it'll be a problem of people clicking but not staying, and YouTube hates that. YouTube would actually rather people not click at all than people click and not stay. So if you've got a situation where people are clicking and not staying, that's going to severely punish the video. But hypothetically, if somebody could do that and the content was utterly responsible, we could have a debate about that. I'm going to be egomaniacal here, like Dmitry Gordon, for a moment, and give you an example of something that I think kind of worked on my main channel a couple of years back. And I think it's a good example of both content and wrapping best practice. And I want to make this point just to emphasize the fact that you can't be a Puritan about colorful wrappers. Otherwise, you're just going to misunderstand what is the most appropriate and ethical way of going on this platform. And I wasn't sure that the thing that I'm about to mention was good, and I don't watch my old videos, so I don't actually know what's terrible and what's good in the catalog. I have a sense on the main channel, but I don't always know. But I rewatched this, and this was this video about Gogol and Russia's sense of historical destiny. And it's the video that's got the most, or the joint most views on the main channel, maybe like 800,000 or 900,000. And the content is really, it could be improved in all kinds of ways. My delivery could be improved, but basically the content is very clearly satisfactory, because I say in it that Russia has a sense of historical destiny without a sense of historical progress. So it's a kind of non-Fukuyamian sense of historical destiny. And that is as interesting as any point made about Russia in the West, I think, in the 21st century. But then it is also wrapped up in a dramatic but responsible wrapper. The picture is me holding the book, from where I translate this quote about the sort of directedness of Russian culture and so on. But the title is something like, "This is the reason why Russia starts insane wars." And this is a clear example of a responsible but dramatic wrapper attached to completely serious content that's not algorithmically based at all. It's based entirely on a sense of what an audience in the West needs to hear. Now, I didn't get any complaints from people about that video, but I sometimes get a complaint on the main channel. It's quite rare, but it has the following structure, and I'll just make up that it applies to that video we're talking about. And it's this: amazing video, the best video I've seen on YouTube all year, but why did you have to say that it's about why Russia starts insane wars? It is a bit about that, because it's about what kind of cultural deformations in Russia lead to its having various cultural and political crises, sure, but it's more a video about Russia's sense of its own directedness through history, and it's also a little bit about this famous quote from Nikolai Gogol's book Dead Souls. So why can't you call it an analysis of a paragraph from Gogol on Russian culture? And here is the answer. if I'd called it that, the video would get 100,000 views. And so that makes the statement self-refuting. Why don't you do that? Well, mate, if I did it, you wouldn't see the damn video. There'd be an 80% chance that you wouldn't see the video because it would get 100,000 views, and now probably just 50 because I haven't been much on the main channel. But it got 8 or 9 because of the packaging, and the packaging is responsible because, god damn it, what I'm describing absolutely is central to why Russia starts insane wars, even though that is not necessarily the central driving theme of the video. So what is satisfactory about it is it does two things which are very rarely done together. It gives very distinctive, high quality, nourishing and evocative content, and it plays the YouTube game well, but without crossing any lines. And the YouTube game is hard, but a lot of people play it well. Good, nourishing content is much harder, and many fewer people play it well. But to combine the two is really, really, I mean, we're talking about threading something through a needle. And so I'm using that as an example to demonstrate that we shouldn't get too Puritan about it. In other words, it would be completely ludicrous to say an analysis of a paragraph from a 19th century book on that title, right? Because that would be, it would be essentially a sort of a gross deprivation of the culture from the very thing you want to communicate to the culture. Having said this, obviously with Gordon we're looking at a completely different extreme, and it's a dance, a co-creation in which on this end, on the listener, viewer, consumer end, consumer is a bad word, but it is not entirely inapplicable, we're also involved in it. We're not just victims of this, we are engaged in a sort of a co-creation of a distortion, creators and consumers of content, mediated by algorithms, put together by companies that are economically interested in us engaging in this truth distorting dance. Lots of love. Talk very soon.